What if the man who built an empire decided to destroy it, not out of greed, but out of love? What if the woman he once tried to break became the only person who could save him from himself in the heart of Boston's glass towers? Nathaniel Cross, a billionaire obsessed with control, meets Claire Bennett, a small studio architect who dares to say no. Her rejection ignites his pride and his downfall. A contract marriage meant to ruin her becomes the very thing that unmasks him. As power turns to passion and revenge turns to regret, two people must learn whether forgiveness can rebuild what pride once destroyed. From betrayal to redemption, from sterile penthouses to sunlit river houses. This is not a story about perfection. It's about the cracks where light gets in. It's about learning that love isn't a contract you sign. It's a choice you make, again and again. So, if you believe that even the coldest hearts can change, and that forgiveness can be stronger than revenge, stay with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because sometimes the brightest tales are born from the darkest mistakes. The morning light spilled across the Boston skyline, turning the Charles River into a sheet of moving silver. From the top floor of Cross Dominion Tower, Nathaniel Cross stood before a wall of glass, his reflection merging with the city he owned. Every building below seemed to answer to him, every deal, every name on every contract. He liked order, the kind that could be measured, controlled, and, when necessary, destroyed. His office was silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. On his desk lay a single envelope, cream-colored and thin, a paper among millions yet somehow heavier than steel. He didn't rush to open it. Nathan never rushed anything. But when he finally slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the letter, a single line undid the stillness around him. Mr. Cross, thank you for your proposal to acquire Bennett's studio. I must decline. Claire Bennett, that was all. No negotiation, no apology, just 3 words that cracked the symmetry of his morning. I must decline. Nathan's anger never came in flames. It came in silence, in the tightening of his jaw, in the way his breath shortened as if the air itself had turned to glass. He placed the letter back on the desk, smoothing it flat with one careful motion. For a long moment, he just looked at it, the way a general studies a map before deciding where to strike. Martha, he said quietly. His assistant appeared in the doorway, calm, experienced, unafraid of him, one of the few who wasn't. Yes, Mr. Cross, find everything you can about Claire Bennett, her firm, her finances, her life. I want it by noon. Yes, sir. When she was gone, the office returned to its disciplined quiet. Nathan turned back to the glass, the city stretching beneath him in obedient order. Yet somewhere in that tidy sprawl was a woman who had said no. People didn't refuse Nathan Cross. Not governors, not developers, not entire city councils. His name moved through Boston like a law of physics. And yet, this woman, this unknown architect, had turned down his offer without hesitation. His father's voice rose uninvited in memory, low and sharp from decades ago. If someone refuses you once, make sure they never get the chance to refuse you again. He had been 15 then, standing in his father's office, the same steel-gray light falling through the same kind of window. The words had branded him deeper than any scar. Control was protection. To lose control was humiliation and humiliation. In his father's world was death. Nathan checked the clock, 9:12 SCUS. The board meeting would start in less than 20 minutes, yet his focus stayed fixed on that letter. The paper was thick, expensive, unpretentious. The signature, precise but not self-important. She hadn't tried to impress him. That, more than the refusal, unsettled him. Who was this Claire Bennett who could turn down Cross Dominion's offer as though it were a casual invitation? Who, in this city, still wrote letters instead of emails? He folded the page again and placed it inside his drawer, as if closing a file, but the words stayed open in his mind. Later, During the meeting, charts and numbers blurred into background noise. The CFO's voice droned on about projections and returns. But all Nathan heard was the echo of that small, unbending sentence, "I must decline." By the time the room emptied, he already knew what he would do. He would meet her not to negotiate, not yet, but to understand. People fascinated him only when they resisted him. That evening, when the city lights began to flicker against the river, Martha returned with a folder. She runs a small architectural studio on Beacon Hill. She said, restoration projects, sustainable design, respectable reputation. She took on her late father's debts after he passed last year. She works hard to keep the company independent. She refuses investors, Nathan noted. Principled, Martha said softly, or stubborn. He allowed himself the smallest smile. Everyone bends eventually. Maybe, she replied, meeting his eyes. But some don't break the way you expect. When she left, the silence deepened again. Outside, the river flowed indifferent and steady. Nathan leaned back in his chair and studied the skyline, the line between light and shadow sharpening as dusk settled. He had spent years mastering the art of control of people, of markets, of his own impulses. Yet tonight, a simple refusal had shaken something inside him that no victory ever had. It wasn't the loss of a deal, it was the sting of curiosity. He thought of his younger brother, gone these many years, who once told him, "You can't control people, Nate, you can only scare them, and scared people never love you." He had dismissed it then, but alone in the glass tower, the words felt heavier than the city beneath him. Nathan opened the drawer once more and looked at the letter. The paper caught a sliver of city light, gleaming like a challenge. He whispered, "All right, Ms. Bennett. Let's see what kind of woman says no to me." Outside, Boston moved on, unaware that one short letter had just redrawn the quiet empire of Nathaniel Cross. Morning sunlight spilled across the narrow brick street of Beacon Hill, brushing over flower boxes and wrought iron balconies. Inside a small studio, above a coffee shop, Claire Bennett leaned over a table scattered with sketches and wooden models. The air smelled faintly of cedar, coffee, and a hint of paint, the scent of her everyday life. Her hands moved with quiet focus, tracing a line along a floor plan. The studio was nothing fancy. 3 desks, 2 interns, 1 aging printer that moaned like an old dog every time it worked. But it was hers, every square inch of it. Behind her, the soft sound of a kettle whistled. Her mother, Ellen Bennett, stood in the tiny kitchenette, hair silvered, her movements patient and deliberate. Ellen had taught literature for 30 years before a stroke slowed her down. Now she spent mornings helping with invoices and afternoons reading by the window. "Claire, honey," Ellen called gently. "You've been at that drawing since 6. Claire smiled without looking up. "Almost done. Mom, it's the library project. The committee wants the lighting to feel like dawn." Ellen chuckled. "Maybe they should just open earlier." Claire laughed softly. The sound carried warmth that filled the small space, balancing the fatigue under her eyes. The door opened, and Daniel Brooks stepped inside, shaking the cold from his coat. He carried 2 coffees and the kind of easy grin that only old friends could share, still saving the world. 1 window frame at a time, he teased, setting a cup beside her. "Trying," she said, sipping gratefully, "though lately it feels more like saving the studio from the bank." Daniel leaned on the drafting table, scanning her drawings. "You know, there are easier ways to survive than designing affordable community centers." "I'm aware," she said. He hesitated, then added, "Claire, I saw the news. Cross Dominion just bought half the waterfront. They're acquiring smaller firms for the restoration project. You could sell, pay off the debt, take care of your mom. You'd be set for life." Claire set her pencil down slowly. "Design isn't about profit, Dan. It's about purpose." Daniel's smile faded into a look of worry. "Purpose doesn't keep the lights on." She met his eyes steady, certain. "Neither does selling your soul." The conversation ended there. Quiet, but unresolved. He knew better than to argue when she used that voice, the one that sounded calm on the surface but had steel underneath. After Daniel left, Claire returned to her sketches, but something unsettled her. Cross Dominion. The name echoed faintly. She remembered the proposal letter last week, the one she'd refused without hesitation. Everyone had warned her, you don't say no to Nathaniel Cross, but she didn't like how his company treated neighborhoods like chess pieces. Buildings had souls, just like people, and she wasn't about to sell hers. The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. She wiped her hands on her jeans and picked it up. Bennett's studio. This is Claire. A deep, measured voice answered. Ms. Bennett. Nathaniel Cross speaking. For a moment, she froze. The sound of his name felt like a shift in air pressure. Mr. Cross, she said carefully. How can I help you? I received your letter. Then my message was clear. There was a pause long enough for her to hear his steady breathing. I prefer to discuss matters in person, he said finally. Over dinner, perhaps. The Meridian Hotel, 7 p.m. Her pulse quickened, not with flattery, but with irritation. That's kind of you, but unnecessary. My answer won't change. Ms. Bennett. His tone softened, almost amused. I think you'll find conversations with me can be persuasive, and I think you'll find I'm immune to persuasion when it compromises integrity. He didn't respond immediately. Then came a quiet exhale. Very well. Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett. The line clicked. Silence again. She stared at the phone, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. Only the hum of traffic drifted in from the street below. Ellen looked up from her chair. Was that the man from the papers? Claire nodded. Nathaniel Cross himself. Her mother's brows furrowed. You were polite, I hope. Claire smiled faintly. Polite enough to make sure he never calls again. Ellen chuckled, though worry flickered in her eyes. Men like that don't take no gracefully. Claire bent to kiss her mother's forehead. Then, it's a good thing I've had practice saying it. Later that evening, the city began to glow outside her studio windows. She stayed behind after the interns left, tidying up, setting the models back in place. A gentle rain tapped the glass, making the streetlights shimmer. She thought again about that phone call, the steady confidence in his voice, the undercurrent of command. It wasn't arrogance exactly, it was certainty, the kind of certainty that came from never hearing no. For a moment, she felt a pang of something that wasn't fear but intrigue. What kind of man believed he could buy everything, and why did he sound more lonely than powerful? She shook the thought away. The world was full of powerful men who mistook control for love, money for meaning. Her father had once built buildings for them, until he lost himself trying to please people who saw beauty only in profit margins. She'd watched it hollow him out, watched his heart fail under the weight of compromise. Never again. She'd promised. Not her, not this studio. Down on the street, a sleek black car slowed near the building, its headlights reflecting against the rain. For a moment, she thought it might stop, but it rolled on, turning at the corner. She turned off the lamp and gathered her sketchbook. The room went dim, except for the city glow. Claire paused at the door, taking one last look at the little studio, the shelves of models, the plants, the soft hum of her mother's favorite old radio. Small, imperfect, honest, exactly the opposite of the world Nathaniel Cross ruled. And though she didn't know it yet, the word she'd spoken that morning, no, had just changed both their lives forever. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the Boston streets slick and glittering under amber lights. In the heart of Back Bay, the restaurant Le Marais glowed like a golden secret behind frosted glass. It was the kind of place where every whisper cost a fortune, and every diner pretended not to look at who else was there. Nathaniel Cross sat alone at a corner table, posture perfect, a single glass of bourbon untouched before him. He didn't fidget, didn't check his watch. When he waited, the world adjusted to his timing. At precisely 7 o'clock, the maitre d' led Claire Bennett through the room. She was wearing a simple black dress, hair pinned up, no jewelry but a thin silver bracelet. Under the warm light, her face carried that same quiet confidence he remembered from her letter, steady, unflinching. She stopped beside the table. Mr. Cross, Ms. Bennett. He stood, motioning to the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming. I'm not sure why I did," she replied, sitting down carefully. He gave a faint smile. Curiosity, perhaps, more likely concern. "You don't seem like a man who hears no and lets it go." He almost laughed at that. "You're perceptive." The waiter approached, poured wine, disappeared. The air between them carried the faint hum of expensive quiet. Nathan studied her. "I respect conviction," he said. "It's rare these days." "I didn't come here for compliments," she replied evenly. "What is it you actually want?" He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, eyes locked on hers. "I want you to marry me." She blinked, then laughed softly, uncertain whether he was serious. "Excuse me. A temporary arrangement," he clarified. 3 months, 6, at most, strictly professional. Claire stared at him, the words slow to land. "That's absurd." "Not as absurd as it sounds," he said. "I'm finalizing a merger with a conservative investment board, family-oriented image, strict codes of personal conduct. They need to believe I'm settled, married. It would make the deal effortless." Her voice hardened. "So, you want a wife for decoration?" "I want a partner who understands discretion," he corrected. "You want control," she countered. His mouth curved slightly. "Call it mutual benefit." She shook her head in disbelief. "You brought me here for this, to turn a woman's life into a PR stunt." Nathan's tone stayed calm. "You're not just anyone, Ms. Bennett. You're intelligent, self-assured. You'd handle attention gracefully." "I already have a life," she said. "One that doesn't include pretending to love a man who thinks contracts are stronger than promises." Nathan's fingers tapped the glass once, then stilled. "I expected you to say that." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. Curious despite herself, Claire opened it and froze. It was a purchase confirmation. The header read, "Mass Bay Credit Union." Her heart sank. "These," he said quietly, "are the outstanding debts tied to Bennett's studio. Your father's collateral notes, your current mortgage, and your business line of credit. As of this morning, they belong to Cross Dominion Holdings." She looked up at him, eyes sharp. "You bought my debt. I acquired an opportunity," he said smoothly. "An opportunity to what? Own me to offer you freedom." He folded his hands, calm as ever. "Marry me, and the debt disappears. 6 months, then a clean annulment. You'll walk away debt-free, with enough to secure your studio permanently." Claire's voice trembled between fury and disbelief. "That's blackmail." He tilted his head slightly. "It's business." She rose halfway from her seat. "Business doesn't involve people's lives." "Everything involves people's lives," he said quietly. "You just choose which ones you change." The words cut through her like cold wind. Around them, the restaurant carried on, oblivious waiters gliding, glasses clinking softly. She sat back down, not because she wanted to, but because her legs felt weak. Her mind spun with numbers, names, memories. Her father's gentle smile, the hospital bills, the loans she'd taken to keep his company alive. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from somewhere deep inside her memory, "Never let pride cost you your future." Claire. The world's built by those who know when to bend. But another part of her stronger, prouder, fought back. And what's the future worth if you can't live with yourself? She pressed her hands together, forcing her breathing steady. "If I say no," Nathan looked at her for a long, unreadable moment, "then I'll find another way to collect." The calmness in his tone frightened her more than any threat could. He continued, "You have until tomorrow, noon." Claire stared at him. "You've turned my father's legacy into a bargaining chip." He didn't deny it. I'm offering you a way out of a losing battle, by chaining myself to you, by saving what you love. Their eyes met. A silent war across a table dressed in white linen. For the first time, she saw past his composure the faint tension around his jaw, the flicker of something that wasn't cruelty but fear, fear of losing control. And for the first time, he saw the depth of her defiance, quiet, grounded, the kind that couldn't be bought. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "I'll think about it." Nathan nodded once, not triumphantly, but solemnly. "That's all I ask." She stood, gathering her coat, eyes never leaving his. "You have no idea what kind of war you've started." He rose too, watching her walk away, her figure dissolving into the amber light beyond the glass doors. The bourbon on the table remained untouched. Nathan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle like dust on his conscience. He told himself it was strategy, not emotion, that this was about control, not curiosity. But as the door closed behind her, a thought surfaced quiet, unwanted. What if she says yes? The next morning came gray and cold, the kind of Boston day when even the sky looked tired. Inside City Hall, everything smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering once in a while, as if protesting the ceremony about to happen. Claire Bennett stood at the edge of the marble counter, holding a simple bouquet she hadn't chosen. Her hands trembled slightly, though her face remained calm. She had told her mother she was traveling for a project, told Daniel she needed space. Lies that tasted bitter but necessary. Beside her, Nathaniel Cross looked as composed as ever, gray suit, black tie, eyes unreadable. If he felt anything at all, it didn't show. He signed the papers like he was closing another deal. In a way, he was the clerk, an older man with kind eyes, read the vows without looking up. "Do you, Nathaniel James Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Nathan said, his voice steady, almost detached. "And do you, Claire Elise Bennett, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Claire hesitated for half a heartbeat, then whispered, "I do." It wasn't love. It wasn't even hate. It was surrender, cold and temporary. The clerk slid 2 simple rings across the counter. They weren't ornate, just plain silver bands. Nathan took hers, hesitated slightly before slipping it onto her finger. His touch was brief, businesslike, but for a fraction of a second, his fingers lingered longer than necessary. When it was her turn, she placed the ring on his hand. The metal felt cold, heavier than gold should. "You may kiss the bride," the clerk said, smiling awkwardly. They both froze. Nathan bent forward, a polite distance between them, and brushed his lips against her cheek, a gesture meant for an audience that wasn't there. The touch was quick, restrained, almost mechanical, but Claire still felt the echo of it linger long after it ended. When it was done, they walked out of City Hall as husband and wife, 2 strangers bound by paper and pride. Outside, the world went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. People hurried past with umbrellas, taxis splashed through puddles, and no one noticed the woman in a pale coat standing beside a billionaire who looked more like her captor than her groom. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Nathan opened the door for her. She hesitated before stepping in, realizing this was the first time he had done something that resembled courtesy. Inside, the silence was thick. She stared out the window as the city blurred by brick buildings giving way to glass towers. The drive to his penthouse took 12 minutes, though it felt much longer. When they arrived, the elevator opened directly into his apartment. Floor-to-ceiling glass surrounded them, reflecting the skyline like a mirror maze. Everything gleamed steel, marble, glass, all sterile perfection. Claire stepped inside slowly. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum of someone's success, curated for admiration, not living. Nathan's voice broke the silence. "You'll find everything you need in the guest room at the end of the hall. It's yours for as long as this arrangement lasts." She turned to face him. "Arrangement?" That's what you call it. He met her gaze, calm but distant. It's what it is. And how long do we pretend to be husband and wife? 6 months? Maybe less. And after that, an annulment, quiet and clean. You'll keep your studio. Your debt will be erased. No interviews, no scandal. Her laugh was bitter, efficient. Mr. Cross, you think of everything. Efficiency keeps things civilized, he replied. She crossed her arms. And the rules. He hesitated, then recited them like a contract. We maintain separate rooms. We appear together at public events, dinners, and board functions. Nothing more. Discretion is important. Claire nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I see 2 rooms, 2 lives, 1 lie. Nathan's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Later, when he left for an evening call, Claire wandered through the penthouse. Every surface reflected her image back at her tiny versions of herself, lost in endless glass. She found her room, large but impersonal, as if designed for a guest who would never stay long. She unpacked quietly 2 changes of clothes, her sketchbook, her father's worn drafting pencil. She placed the pencil on the nightstand like an anchor in unfamiliar waters. From the window, she could see the river stretching toward the harbor, glittering under city lights. Somewhere out there, the people she cared about were living real lives, messy, imperfect, free. Here, everything was immaculate and empty. She walked to the living room, where a single-framed photograph sat on a table. Nathan with another man, his younger brother, she guessed, both smiling, wind in their hair. It was the only hint of warmth in the entire place. When Nathan returned, he found her standing by the window. Beautiful view, she said without turning. It helps me think, or hide. He paused behind her, the distance between them filled with words unsaid. We all hide from something, he said finally. She looked at his reflection in the glass. I just didn't think you'd hide in plain sight. His eyes met hers in the reflection. You'll find I do a lot of things people don't expect. She turned to face him fully, her voice low and steady. I already have. He nodded once, the faintest sign of respect. Dinner is at 7. Formal. The board expects a united front. She gave a short, humorless smile. Of course. Wouldn't want to disappoint the audience. When he left the room, she exhaled slowly. The city glimmered beyond the glass, a sea of lights she couldn't touch. For a long time, she stood there, tracing her reflection with her eyes, the faint outline of a woman who looked strong on the outside but hollow within. Finally, she whispered to herself, I just sold 2 years of my life. The words drifted through the stillness like a confession no one would hear. The first week of marriage passed like an arrangement of polite silences. Mornings in the Cross penthouse followed a rhythm, efficient, wordless, predictable. Claire Bennett would come downstairs early, hair loosely tied, sketchbook under her arm. She'd make tea, spread her designs across the long marble table, and lose herself in the quiet precision of her pencil. The only sound was the faint scratching of graphite against paper and the hum of the espresso machine across the room. Nathaniel Cross appeared at exactly 7:30, every morning, without fail, shirt crisp, watch gleaming, expression unreadable. He took his seat at the opposite end of the table with his tablet and a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, no conversation. For 30 minutes, they coexisted like 2 reflections on opposite sides of glass, near, but never touching. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, Claire studied him. There was precision in everything he did, a discipline that bordered on obsession. Even the way he stirred his coffee 3 clockwise turns. One counter felt rehearsed. He rarely looked up, but when he did, his eyes seemed to calculate more than see. Yet she noticed something small, the faint scar on his left wrist. A line so pale it almost disappeared under his cuff. A flaw, a story. It was the first time she thought of him as human. By afternoon, Their schedules diverged. Nathan went to meetings, interviews, photo ops, the world of cameras and contracts. Claire stayed home, trying to make sense of a place that never felt like hers. The penthouse was immaculate but lifeless, a museum of success. The only green thing in sight was a single potted fern in the kitchen, already wilting. One afternoon, she found herself kneeling beside it, gently pruning the brown leaves. She watered it, adjusted its place by the window, and whispered, "Don't give up just because it's cold up here." She didn't realize Nathan was watching from across the room. "You talk to plants now?" he asked, his tone half amused, half irritated. "At least they listen," she replied, not turning around. He folded his arms. "You're free to redecorate if you want." She smiled faintly. "It's not the furniture that's suffocating." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Something about her calm unnerved him, the way she refused to fight back, to yell, to react the way people usually did when pushed. That evening, during a stage dinner for charity press photos, they played their roles to perfection. Cameras flashed as he placed a steady hand on her back, and she smiled on cue. From a distance, they looked like a perfect couple, wealth and grace wrapped in soft lighting. But inside, they were strangers, performing a well-rehearsed lie. Later, in the car, silence filled the space between them like fog. Claire looked out the window at the city lights gliding past. Nathan scrolled through his phone, pretending not to notice the heaviness in the air. "Finally," he said, almost accusingly. "Why aren't you angry?" She turned to him, startled. "About what?" "About me. About this." Most people would have screamed, cursed, thrown something. "You just endure." Her voice was quiet. "Because anger doesn't change truth. Mr. Cross. It just makes it louder." He frowned, uncertain whether that was wisdom or defiance. Back at the penthouse, they went to their separate rooms as usual. But that night, sleep came slowly to both. For Claire, the stillness pressed heavy against the glass walls. She turned restlessly, her mind looping through her father's words, her mother's soft laugh, the weight of the silver ring on her finger. Across the hall, Nathan sat in his office, surrounded by the glow of city lights and the faint hum of the air system. A decanter of bourbon sat untouched beside him. On his desk was a small, framed photograph, the one she'd noticed before, two boys standing on a fishing dock, wind in their hair, sunlight in their eyes. His brother, younger by a few years, smiling like the world hadn't yet learned how to hurt. It was nearly 3 when Claire woke from a half-dream, unable to shake a restless feeling. She got up, pulled on her robe, and wandered through the quiet apartment. Light spilled faintly from Nathan's office. She hesitated, then knocked softly. No answer. She pushed the door open and found him sitting there, still in his shirt and tie, the city reflected across the glass walls around him. The photograph rested in his hands. He didn't look up. "You should be asleep," he said, voice low. "So should you." A faint smile ghosted across his face. "Old habits." She stepped closer, her tone soft. "Was that your brother?" He nodded. "Michael?" "He was 24 when he died." Claire hesitated, sensing the weight behind his words. "I'm sorry." He turned the photo slightly, staring at it as if afraid to look away. He was reckless, brave, stupid, full of life. Everything I wasn't. He drowned on a sailing trip I told him not to take. "You blame yourself," she said gently. He exhaled, the sound barely audible. Someone had to. For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the hum of the city outside. Claire wanted to say something kind, something true, but the words stayed caught in her throat. Instead, she simply stood beside him, close enough for silence to do the talking. Finally. Nathan placed the photo down and rubbed his eyes. "You should go back to bed, Ms. Bennett, Claire," she corrected softly. "You can call me Claire." He looked at her, surprised. Then, for the first time, his voice lost its edge. "Good night, Claire, good night." Nathan. As she left the room, she glanced back once. He was still there, motionless, the photograph lit by the faint glow of the city, and for a reason she couldn't explain, she whispered into the darkness, "You're not as heartless as you think." Nathan didn't hear her, but somehow, the silence that followed didn't feel quite as heavy. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow thaw after winter. Nothing between Nathaniel Cross and Claire Bennett changed dramatically, yet everything felt different. Nathan began to appear in places he hadn't before. He started driving her to her site visits, claiming it was for public optics. But she noticed the small tells the way he turned off his phone during those drives, the way he actually listened when she talked about design, community, and light. They drove through the quiet edges of Boston, past rows of aging brownstones and construction sites where new glass towers rose against the skyline. Most developers, Claire said one morning, flipping through sketches in her lap, want to erase the old parts of a city. They forget people remember through buildings. Nathan glanced at her. Memories don't pay the bills. She smiled faintly. Neither does arrogance. But people keep investing in that too. He almost laughed a short, quiet sound, as if his body wasn't used to it anymore. It surprised them both. When they arrived at the site, he followed her through the dust and scaffolding without complaint. He even carried her toolbox once, though he muttered about it the whole way. That afternoon, she caught him studying a row of hand-painted tiles salvaged from a demolished home. "You kept these," he asked. "They belong to a family that lived here for 60 years. She said, "I couldn't throw away their history." He traced the pattern with his thumb, a faded blue tulip. "I don't think I've ever owned anything that long." Claire looked at him, and for a moment, she saw not the billionaire, but the boy who had once lost a brother and built walls instead of healing. Later that week, Martha Hale walked into Nathan's office, setting down a folder with her usual quiet grace. She'd known him since before the suits and the empire, back when he still laughed easily and slept through the night. She looked at him now, standing by the window. Tie loosened, eyes unfocused. "You've been different lately," she said. "Different?" he asked, without turning. "Less like a machine." "More like a man." He raised an eyebrow, finally meeting her gaze. "You sound concerned." "I'm hopeful," she corrected. "She makes you human again." Nathan's expression faltered. "She makes me distracted." "Maybe distraction is what you've needed," Martha said softly. He didn't answer, but after she left, he caught himself staring at his reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, he didn't quite recognize the man looking back. At home, Claire noticed subtle changes too. The air felt less sharp. Nathan asked questions, small ones about her projects, her favorite places in the city, her late father's old drafting tools. Once, when she mentioned how her father used to whistle while sketching, Nathan said quietly, "You hum?" She blinked, surprised. "I do. Every morning," he said. "When you draw, the same few notes." She laughed softly. "I didn't realize." He smiled, a rare, unguarded thing. "It's peaceful." That night, as she sketched by the window, she caught him looking at her from across the room. His gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was searching, hesitant, like a man who wanted to step closer but didn't trust himself to. And somewhere deep him, something shifted. He began to look forward to the mornings, to the sound of her humming, the sight of her messy bun, the way she frowned when her pencil smudged the paper. He hated that these details Lingineside read with him longer than financial reports or board meetings. He hated that he noticed her at all, because with every small kindness, every word she spoke without venom, she dismantled the walls he had spent decades building. And he didn't know who he was without those walls. At night, when she went to bed, he'd linger in his office, pretending to work, but instead listening for the faint hum of her voice through the thin walls, the sound of her laughter during a late call with her mother. It haunted him, not because it hurt, but because it made him feel alive. One evening, they attended a charity dinner at the Four Seasons, another public appearance for the press. Cameras flashed as they entered arm in arm. She wore a soft gray dress that caught the light with every step, and for the first time, Nathan realized how much gentleness could command attention without demanding it. Throughout the night, she spoke easily with guest donors, architects, journalists, and Nathan found himself watching, not out of control, but admiration. When a board member teased, "Your wife's quite the charm," Nathan, he only smiled faintly and said, "Yes, she is." The word wife had never felt real until that moment. Later, in the car, neither spoke for a while. The city lights rolled past in golden streaks. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "You didn't have to say that," she murmured. "Say what?" "That I'm your wife." He turned toward her, eyes steady. "But you are—" She looked away, heart caught between disbelief and confusion. "On paper." "Paper doesn't stop it from being true," he said quietly. The words lingered between them, heavy with meanings neither dared to name. When they reached home, she excused herself and went straight to her room, closing the door behind her. For the first time since their wedding, her hands shook. She wasn't sure if it was anger or fear or something dangerously close to longing. Across the hall, Nathan sat alone, replaying the sound of her humming in his mind. The tune echoed faintly through the walls, gentle, constant, disarming. He poured himself a drink, untouched again, and whispered to the empty room, "You're making a mistake. Nathan, she's not yours." But the silence that followed didn't agree. The evening of the Trinity Hall Gala arrived with the weight of expectation. It was the event of the season, a glittering celebration of philanthropy, power, and polished smiles. The kind of place where every camera flash was a calculated currency. The grand hall shimmered under chandeliers, strings played softly in the background, and champagne flowed like liquid light. The guests came dressed in ambition and perfume, and in the middle of it all, Nathaniel Cross and Claire Bennett entered like a secret everyone wanted to decode. She wore an ivory gown, simple but breathtaking, the kind that caught light without needing to sparkle. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling like soft rebellion around her face. Nathan, in his black tuxedo, looked every bit the untouchable mogul. Together, they were striking beauty and control, warmth and frost. Cameras flashed as they descended the marble stairs, his hand steady on her back. He leaned close, whispering, "Smile, Mrs. Cross." She did for the cameras, not for him. The night moved in measured elegance, toasts, laughter, the hum of polite conversation. Claire navigated it gracefully, speaking with architects, donors, and community planners who admired her recent work on the restoration project. Nathan watched from a distance, the faintest hint of pride flickering across his composed face. And then she appeared. Evelyn Ross, Nathan's ex-fiancée, the one the tabloids had called the Ice Queen of Beacon Hill. She glided across the room in a crimson gown, diamonds catching every glimmer of light, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Nathan," she purred as she approached, voice dipped in honey and poison. "It's been too long." He stiffened, polite but guarded. "Evelyn." Her gaze slid to Claire, appraising, calculating. "And this must be the new Mrs. Cross." Claire extended her hand calmly. "Claire Bennett." Evelyn's lips curved. "Bennett. Of course. The architect. I've read about your studio." Claire smiled politely. "That's kind of you." Evelyn leaned closer, her perfume heavy with memory. "Tell me, Claire, does Nathan still treat every relationship like a business negotiation?" Nathan's expression tightened, but Claire's stayed serene. "Only the ones that begin as contracts," she said softly. Evelyn's eyes glittered, impressed and insulted all at once. She tilted her head, voice low enough for only Claire to hear. "Be careful, dear. You're just another project to him. He builds things only to prove he can. And then he moves on." Claire held her gaze, unflinching. "Then maybe this project will surprise him." Evelyn smiled, slow, deliberate, dangerous, then drifted away into the crowd, leaving behind the faint scent of roses and rivalry. Nathan turned to Claire, his voice controlled. What did she say? Nothing I didn't already suspect, Claire replied, lifting her glass. Shall we keep pretending? He hesitated, then offered his hand. Dance with me. She blinked, caught off guard. Now. Yes, now. The orchestra shifted to a slow waltz. Couples glided across the floor, elegant and practiced. When Nathan pulled her into the center of the room, the crowd parted slightly, eyes turning toward them. His hand settled at her waist, steady, careful, almost hesitant. Her fingers rested lightly on his shoulder. They began to move in slow circles, the rhythm pulling them closer than either had planned. You didn't have to defend me, he murmured. I wasn't defending you, she said. I was defending myself. He almost smiled. You're infuriating. You're welcome. For a few moments, the world around them blurred the chandeliers, the whispering crowd, even the music, until all that remained was the warmth of her hand in his and the scent of her perfume, faint and real. He leaned closer, his voice just above a whisper. She's wrong, you know, about what you're not just another project. Claire met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no sarcasm, no armor. Just two people caught between truth and illusion. Her heart quickened despite herself. Then what am I? Nathan hesitated. His fingers tightened slightly at her waist. I don't know yet. The honesty in his voice disarmed her more than any manipulation ever could. She looked up at him, and the air between them shifted, charged, fragile. They moved as if guided by something unspoken, a slow step, a turn, the faint brush of her hair against his cheek. At the edge of the dance floor, Daniel Brooks appeared, smiling, warm, oblivious to the tension. Claire, he called, approaching with his usual easy charm. Didn't expect to see you here. She laughed softly, relief breaking through her confusion. Daniel, it's been ages. Nathan's hand dropped from her waist as Daniel took hers. May I? Daniel asked politely. Claire glanced at Nathan, then nodded. Of course. As she danced with Daniel, laughter came easily genuine, unforced. For the first time that evening, she looked free. Nathan watched from across the room, his expression darkening. Every laugh, every spin, every touch between them was a spark against his restraint. He told himself it didn't matter that she was part of a contract, nothing more. But jealousy was not a logical emotion. It rose like heat, tightening in his chest. His vision narrowed until the only thing he saw was her laughing with another man in front of everyone. When the song ended, Daniel bowed playfully. Claire smiled, cheeks flushed. That's when Nathan stepped forward. Mind if I cut in? His tone was polite, but the look in his eyes left no room for refusal. Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. All yours, Mr. Cross. Nathan took her hand firmly, drawing her close. The next song began slower, deeper. Their bodies moved in quiet defiance of reason. His hand at her back, her heartbeat racing under his palm. Her breath hitched when he leaned close enough for his lips to brush the curve of her temple. You shouldn't let him touch you like that, he murmured. Why, she whispered. Because it makes you jealous. His jaw tightened. Because it makes you mine. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. Am I Nathan? He didn't answer, not with words. The music swelled, and they moved together, closer than they should have, until the world around them faded to light and shadow. When the final note fell, they stood still, breathless, shaken, and dangerously aware that the line between pretense and truth had begun to blur. The gala ended long after midnight, but the noise still echoed in their bones. By the time Nathaniel Cross and Claire Bennett returned to the penthouse, the city below shimmered like a restless sea, all glass, wind, and quiet hunger. The elevator doors opened into silence. Claire stepped out first, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The air between them felt charged, fragile like the pause before a storm breaks. Nathan followed, jacket slung loosely over his arm, bow tie undone. He looked different without the armor of composure, younger, almost human. She walked straight to the terrace, needing air, needing distance. The night was cold, the skyline stretching endlessly around her. She leaned against the railing, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. He joined her a moment later, standing close but not touching. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said quietly. By cutting in, his voice was low, steady, by treating me like a possession in front of everyone. That wasn't my intention. She turned toward him, anger and confusion mixing in her eyes. "Then, what was your intention?" "Nathan, to remind me who holds the contract." He met her gaze, unflinching. "To remind myself that you're real." That silenced her just for a breath. The honesty in his tone wasn't cold or cruel. It was raw, almost painful. "You don't get to be jealous," she said finally. "You built this arrangement, you drew the boundaries, and you make me want to break every one of them," he said. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city lights reflected in the glass behind them, multiplying their shadows, two figures caught between reflection and truth. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered. "You can't play with people's hearts because you're lonely." "I'm not," he started, but stopped. The word felt like a lie, even as it left his lips. Claire shook her head. "Don't confuse loneliness with love, Nathan." Her voice was calm, but her heartbeat wasn't. He could almost hear it quick, uneven, pulling him closer despite every warning inside him. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. His breath brushed her temple. "I don't know what this is," he said softly, "but I can't stop thinking about you." She looked up at him, then really looked. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something stripped bare, vulnerable. "You don't need to fix me," she murmured. "Maybe I need you to fix me," he replied. The words hung in the cold air between them. Then, as if pulled by something neither could resist, he leaned in. The first touch of his lips against hers was hesitant, unsure a question, not an answer. She froze not out of fear, but surprise. For all his power, Nathan kissed like a man afraid of breaking something precious. The kiss deepened, slow and searching. The world around them blurred, the hum of traffic, the chill of the wind, the pulse of the city fading into nothing. Her hands found his jacket, gripping it as if to steady herself. His palm pressed gently against her back, feeling the warmth of her breath against his neck. It wasn't staged. It wasn't calculated. It was real, terrifyingly real. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing unevenly. Claire was the first to speak. That shouldn't have happened. Nathan's voice was hoarse. "I know." She stepped back, eyes glistening under the faint terrace light. "You built this cage. Nathan, don't reach for the key just because you're lonely in it." He wanted to argue, to say that loneliness had nothing to do with it, but the words stuck in his throat, because part of him knew she was right. "Good night," she said softly, and turned to leave. He didn't stop her. He only watched as she disappeared inside, her silhouette fading through the glass doors. Nathan stayed there for a long time, staring at the skyline, the city that had always felt like his empire, now suddenly too vast, too hollow. He could still taste the faint sweetness of her lip gloss, still feel the warmth where her fingers had brushed his chest. For years, control had been his language, power, his comfort. But tonight, neither offered solace. He walked back inside, removing his jacket, his steps heavy. The penthouse felt colder than before, the kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, but from absence. He poured himself a drink, took a sip, and set it down untouched. Then, almost against his will, he looked toward her closed door down the hall. He thought of her words, "Don't confuse loneliness with love." They repeated in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. He wanted to dismiss them, to bury them under reason and pride, but he couldn't, because every time he tried, he remembered the way she had looked at him, not with submission, not even forgiveness, but understanding. and that understanding felt more dangerous than hate ever could. He walked to the window, resting a hand against the cool glass. The reflection staring back at him looked nothing like the man who had once treated people as investments. His tie was loose, his eyes tired, his mask cracked. He whispered to the empty city, "What are you doing to me?" "Claire." No answer came, only the soft hum of Boston at night. When he finally lay in bed, sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the light in her eyes, the tremor in her voice, the truth in her warning. By dawn, the bourbon glass still sat untouched on his nightstand, and in the reflection of the window, he looked less like a man in control and more like one falling, quietly, completely. It was a gray morning, one of those Boston days when the light never fully wakes. Claire Bennett sat at the kitchen table, sketchbook open but untouched. The quiet between her and Nathaniel Cross had grown heavy since the night on the terrace, full of things neither dared to name. He had left early for meetings. She was grateful for the space. The world outside blurred behind the rain-streaked glass, and she tried to lose herself in lines and paper. That's when her phone buzzed. A message. No name, just a number she didn't recognize. It read, "You deserve to know who he really is." Attached was an audio file. Claire hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then, curiosity and dread tangled together, and she pressed play. Nathan's voice filled the room, unmistakable, calm, deliberate. "I don't care what it takes. I'll break that stubborn architect who humiliated me. She'll wish she never said no." Her breath caught. The sound quality was clear. No doubt it was him. The date stamped 3 months ago, just before he had made her the offer. "It's not personal," the voice continued. "It's principle. People like her need to learn that pride is expensive." Claire's hands trembled. The phone slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a dull sound. For a moment, she just stared at it, the echo of his voice replaying in her head, tearing through every fragile thing she'd started to believe. All the small moments, the laughter, the drives, the dance, the kiss unraveled like threads pulled from a seam. He had planned it, all of it. When the elevator doors opened an hour later, Nathan stepped inside the penthouse, shaking off the rain. He looked tired, distracted until he saw her standing in the middle of the room, pale and still, holding her phone. "Claire," he said slowly, "what's wrong?" She turned toward him, her eyes raw but dry. "I got a message this morning." He frowned. From who? From Evelyn. His face changed. A flicker of recognition and guilt. "What did she send you?" he asked carefully. "A recording." Her voice was quiet, trembling at the edges. "Your voice. Saying you'd break me?" Nathan froze. "Claire, don't!" She snapped, her composure cracking. "Don't lie. I heard it. Nathan, every word." He took a step closer, hands raised slightly, as if calming a frightened animal. "It was before I knew you, before any of this changed." Changed. She let out a laugh, sharp, hollow. "You mean before you kissed me? Before you made me believe this wasn't just another one of your games?" "It wasn't a game," he said firmly. "At first, maybe it was business pride, but it isn't now." She shook her head, tears finally breaking free. "You can't rewrite history just because you hate how it sounds." "Claire, please," he said, stepping closer. "I was angry. You embarrassed me. I said things I didn't mean. But you did mean them," she whispered. "You bought my debt. You trapped me in this marriage. You owned me, Nathan. And now you want me to believe it was never about revenge." His voice faltered. "It stopped being about that a long time ago." Her eyes met his, hurt and clarity mingling like storm clouds. "Then, what is it now?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth, whatever it was, refused to take shape. "Was I just your redemption story?" she asked softly. "A way to make yourself feel human again, Claire? Or was I still your punishment? Nathan reached for her, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me. Let me explain." "You can't explain a recording." "Nathan, you can't explain cruelty dressed as strategy." He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "I was wrong. I was angry. But everything after every moment was real." She stared at him, searching for sincerity, for something to hold on to. But every time she looked into his eyes, she heard his voice from that recording again, cold, deliberate, vengeful. "Finally," she said quietly, "you don't get to define what was real. You already chose your truth months ago." Nathan's chest tightened. "You're leaving?" It wasn't a question. She nodded once, slow and certain. "I have to." He tried to reach for her again, voice breaking for the first time. "Don't do this." Claire met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw nothing soft left in them. Only heartbreak, clean, final. "You were right about one thing," she said. "Pride is expensive, but so is trust." She walked toward the elevator without looking back. "Claire," he said again, his voice cracking. "Please." She hesitated for a second, just long enough to let silence answer him. Then she stepped inside. The doors began to close, slow and merciless. Through the narrowing gap, their eyes met one last time, his full of regret, hers full of loss. When the doors finally sealed shut, the click echoed through the penthouse like a coffin lid. Nathan stood there, motionless, the sound of the elevator descending hollow in his ears. The city outside kept shining indifferent, merciless, alive. He sank into the nearest chair, staring at the phone she'd left on the counter, the faint glow of the screen fading to black. Her voice replayed in his mind, over and over. "Was I just your revenge?" He buried his face in his hands, the empire of glass around him suddenly feeling like a cage built by his own arrogance. The road to Vermont wound through bare November trees, their branches black against a pale sky. Claire Bennett drove in silence, the hum of the tires, the only sound between thoughts she didn't want to have. Boston disappeared behind her, its towers, its glass, its ghosts. By the time she reached her mother's small farmhouse, the sun was sinking behind the hills, turning the fields gold and gray. The porch light was on, just like it had been every night when she was a child coming home late from school. Ellen Bennett opened the door before Claire could knock. "Oh, honey." That was all it took. The composure Claire had held for 2 days cracked like thin glass. She fell into her mother's arms, sobs muffled against a sweater that smelled of lavender and home. They didn't talk much that night. Ellen made tea, the way she always did when words weren't enough. Claire sat by the window, staring at the outline of the old maple tree in the yard, the same tree her father used to hang lanterns on during summer evenings. Now, it stood bare, skeletal, beautiful in its emptiness. The next morning, she woke to the sound of rain against the roof. The house creaked softly, the familiar language of old wood. For the first time in months, there were no cameras, no stage smiles, no marble floors reflecting her loneliness back at her, and yet the quiet hurt just the same. Anger came first, at Nathan, at Evelyn, at herself. She smashed a coffee mug that wasn't meant to break, then swept the pieces into a trembling hand. Her mother watched from the doorway, not saying a word. Then grief came slower, heavier. It crept in during the hours between night and morning, when the house was too still, when her heart insisted on remembering his voice, his touch, his laughter, the one that had started to sound real. Finally came numbness, the stage where tears ran out and even breathing felt like work. She stayed like that for days, moving through the motions, feeding the stray cat that visited the porch, washing dishes she hadn't used, pretending she was fine, but she wasn't. One afternoon, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Daniel Brooks stepped out, carrying 2 coffees and the same cautious kindness he always did. "Vermont suits you," he said gently, handing her a cup. "But you look like you haven't slept in a week." "I've been busy," she said with a small, tired smile. Doing what? Trying not to remember things. He nodded, sitting beside her on the porch steps. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that belonged to people who had known each other before life got complicated. After a while, Daniel cleared his throat. There's a firm in Portland looking for a lead designer. Small team, sustainable architecture. It's a good place. They'd take you in a heartbeat. She looked out at the fields, where fog was beginning to settle. Portland, she repeated softly, as if tasting the idea. It's a fresh start. Claire, away from all of this. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine it a new city, a new life, mornings without memories that hurt to breathe through. But when she closed her eyes, she saw glass walls, city lights, and the shape of a man standing alone on a terrace, looking more broken than powerful. Pause, faint piano note. I'll think about it, she said finally. Daniel nodded, though his eyes betrayed concern. You don't owe him anything. You know? I know, she whispered. But sometimes the hardest part isn't what we owe, it's what we still feel. In Boston, the empire was unraveling. Nathaniel Cross had not been to the office in nearly a week. The skyline that once made him feel invincible now looked like judgment. Every tower, every deal, every inch of his reflection reminding him what pride had cost. He canceled 2 major projects, ignored his board's calls, and stopped sleeping. The bourbon bottles multiplied, untouched at first, then not. Martha Hale found him one morning in his office, sitting on the floor beside his desk, a folder open in front of him, Claire's designs, her sketches, her handwriting, the small notes in the margins that read, light, d'urgence, hope, and let air breathe through the structure. He traced one of her pencil lines with his finger, his voice a low rasp. She saw beauty where I only saw profit. Martha stood quietly in the doorway. She still might. If you give her reason to look again, he shook his head. You don't come back from betrayal like that. Maybe not, she said softly. But you can change the man who caused it. Nathan looked up at her, eyes red, shoulders heavy. Martha, I became my father. The confession fell into the room like a stone into deep water. I spent years hating him, he continued, voice trembling, for using people like tools, for thinking power could replace love. And somewhere along the way, I became exactly what I swore I wouldn't be. Martha walked over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, then stopped being him. He let out a long breath, tired, hollow, sincere. I don't know how. She smiled sadly. You start by not trying to control the ending. Nathan looked at the glass wall ahead, where the reflection of the city blurred into rain. She's gone, he whispered. Then maybe it's time, Martha said, to build something that isn't just made of glass. That night, Nathan stood by the window, watching lightning flash over the skyline. For the first time, the storm didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the truth, loud, cleansing, deserved. He whispered her name once, softly, like a prayer, Claire. And though no one answered, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that asks a question, who will you be when the rain stops? 3 weeks passed. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. Once, the stillness had been Nathaniel Cross's comfort. Now it felt like a punishment. The city glittered below him, endless towers of light stretching toward the harbor. But no amount of brightness could fill the hollow inside his chest. The apartment that had once reflected power now looked like an abandoned museum, sterile, cold, haunted. Dust had gathered on the grand piano, no one played. The fern she had watered was brown and brittle, its leaves curled into themselves. He hadn't thrown it away. He couldn't. He sat by the window most nights, nursing a drink he rarely finished, staring at the skyline as if the answers might be hidden somewhere between the lights. Sometimes he imagined he could still hear her voice, the soft hum she made when sketching, the sound of her laughter echoing from the kitchen, even the way she used to sigh half amusement, half disbelief when he said something arrogant. Now, those echoes were all he had left. He hadn't gone back to work. The world outside continued spinning. Deals closed, boardrooms filled, Headlines shifted, but Nathan stayed frozen, trapped in the glass cage he had built for himself. He had tried calling her once. She didn't answer. He didn't try again. That night, the rain returned steady, rhythmic, the kind that fills silence with meaning. Nathan sat at his desk, a single lamp glowing above a blank sheet of paper. He had been staring at it for hours. Finally, he began to write. Claire, I don't know what forgiveness looks like from where you stand. Maybe I don't deserve to find out. I spent so long mistaking control for strength that I forgot what decency feels like. You reminded me, I don't expect you to come back. I only want to become someone who wouldn't lose you again if you did. I hope Vermont is peaceful. I hope you sleep without nightmares. I hope your mother still reads by the window. If you ever hear my name again, I want it to be because I finally did something worth remembering. N. He folded the letter carefully, though he had no address to send it to. One of many unsent letters that now filled a drawer beside his desk, all written to the same woman, all ending the same way. The clock ticked toward midnight. Nathan stood, walked through the apartment, and paused in front of the window where her reflection used to stand beside his. He could almost see her there barefoot, sketchbook in hand, smiling at something he'd said without meaning to be funny. He whispered, I don't know how to live without your noise. The city didn't answer. In the weeks since she'd left, Nathan had begun to see his world with new eyes. The empire he had built, the skyscrapers, the acquisitions, the relentless hunger for control suddenly looked grotesque. Each polished deal was a monument to ego. Each contract a small betrayal disguised as victory. He thought about her words the night she walked out. You already chose your truth months ago. And for the first time, he understood what she meant. Truth wasn't something you declared. It was something you lived with, quietly, every day. He looked down at the city that had once been his kingdom. Maybe it was time to stop being a king. The next morning, Nathan walked into his office for the first time in nearly a month. The staff froze, surprised to see him in the flesh hair slightly unkempt, suit darker than usual, but eyes sharper than they'd been in years. He called a meeting. Martha sat at the end of the conference table, watching him carefully. I'm dismantling the expansion, Nathan said simply. The room went silent. You're what the CFO asked, stunned. I'm dissolving our pending acquisitions. Effective immediately, but that's final. Nathan interrupted. Half the properties we bought are sitting empty while the city drowns in housing shortages. We're restructuring. I want those spaces repurposed shelters, schools, community centers, whatever they need, someone muttered. You'll lose millions. Nathan looked up. I've already lost what matters. After the meeting, Martha followed him into his office. You mean it, she said quietly. He nodded. For once. Yes. Claire would be proud, she said. He gave a small, rueful smile. That's the idea? Martha hesitated. Will you tell her? Nathan looked toward the window, where the city shimmered through thin rain. If she ever hears, I want it to be from someone else, not from me, not as an apology, as proof. That evening, he went home and began sorting through years of paper contracts, trophies, photos of handshakes that meant nothing. He placed them all into a box marked Archive. Then, he took out another box empty and labeled it Bennett Projects. Inside, he placed her sketches, her notes, the mock-ups from the community restoration design she had once proposed. He planned to fund it himself, quietly, anonymously. As he sealed the lid, he whispered, You said design was about purpose, not profit. Maybe it's time I finally learn what you meant. That night, the city outside seemed softer, quieter. The lights no longer mocked him, they simply burned, distant but constant. For the first time since she'd left, Nathan didn't pour himself a drink. He sat by the window and listened to the rain steady, forgiving. He picked up another blank page, took a deep breath, and began to write again. Not a letter this time, but plans blueprints for something new. Not an empire, a beginning. Snow had fallen overnight in Vermont light, powdery, covering everything in a soft, deceptive calm. The world looked clean again, as if nothing cruel had ever happened beneath it. Claire Bennett stood by the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. It had been 3 weeks since she'd left Boston, yet the ache in her chest hadn't softened. Some wounds didn't fade, they just grew quieter. Her mother hummed softly in the next room, folding laundry, pretending not to worry. Outside, the hills shimmered under early morning light. Then, a sound broke the stillness, the low crunch of tires on snow. Claire frowned, setting the cup down. Very few people came this far up the road. Through the window, she saw a car black, expensive, out of place against the rural landscape. The engine cut off. A figure stepped out. At first, she didn't recognize her. Then the door opened, and Evelyn Ross stumbled out, hair undone, mascara smudged, wrapped in a coat far too thin for the cold. Claire met her at the porch steps, tension rising like static. Evelyn's voice cracked. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" "Please," Evelyn said, tears glinting against the gray light. "Just let me explain." Claire hesitated, then stepped aside. The warmth of the cabin seemed to make Evelyn smaller, fragile in a way Claire had never seen. She stood by the fire, trembling, eyes glassy. "I'm not here to hurt you," Evelyn began. "I've already done enough of that." Claire crossed her arms. "Then why are you here?" Evelyn drew a shaky breath. "Because I lied. About the recording." The words fell like a stone into the silence. Claire's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's voice shook. "It wasn't real. Not all of it, anyway. I had a friend, a sound engineer, piece it together from old interviews, business calls. It was supposed to sound like Nathan, to make you believe he said those things." Claire's heart dropped. "You fabricated his voice." Evelyn nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I wanted him to feel what I felt when he left me humiliated, powerless. I wanted to ruin what he loved most. And by then, that was you." Claire's hands trembled. "Why are you telling me this now? Because I can't live with it." Evelyn's voice cracked. "He didn't deserve what I did to him, and neither did you. He never said those words. Claire. Not once." The room went quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Claire felt her pulse racing, disbelief and relief colliding like waves. "You're sure?" Evelyn nodded, her face streaked with tears. "I swear it. I sent the file. I watched it destroy both of you. And when I saw the news," Claire's eyes widened. "What news?" Evelyn looked up, horrified at what she'd almost said. "He's been shutting everything down, his companies, his properties. There were rumors he wasn't well. I thought you knew." Claire's breath caught. "No, I didn't." She grabbed her coat, heart pounding. "Where is he now, Boston? He hasn't been seen for days." Evelyn whispered. "Martha's been trying to reach him." Claire didn't wait. She pulled her keys from the hook, boots thudding against the floor. "Claire, please," Evelyn began. But Claire was already halfway to the door. "You said he didn't say those words. Then I need to hear the truth from him." Outside, the wind bit her face as she climbed into her car. The engine roared to life, tires spinning against the snow-packed drive. The sky was still dark, a pale gray edge forming in the east. She drove fast, too fast for the icy roads, but her fear burned hotter than the cold. Every mile between Vermont and Boston felt heavier than the last. Memories chased her like ghosts, his laughter at breakfast, the softness in his voice when he'd said, "You hum," the kiss on the terrace, the look in his eyes before everything fell apart. And now the possibility that it had all been a lie. Not his lie, hers. Evelyn's. At a gas station an hour outside the city. She stopped just long enough to breathe. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger, tired, pale, eyes fierce with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and whispered, please be alive. Then she drove on. Back at the cabin, Evelyn sat alone by the fire, shaking. Ellen Bennett entered quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "She'll find him," Ellen said softly. Evelyn stared into the flames. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "None of us do," Ellen replied. "But sometimes we get it anyway." By dawn, Boston came into view, steel, glass, and light breaking through the fog. Claire gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her heart hammered as she turned onto the familiar street, the one that led to the Cross Dominion Tower. The building loomed ahead, tall and silent, its mirrored surface reflecting the rising sun. She parked hastily, barely remembering to close the door behind her. The lobby was quiet, too quiet for a weekday morning. Even the receptionist looked startled when she walked in. "I need to see Mr. Cross," Claire said, breathless. The woman hesitated. "He hasn't been in for several days." "Ma'am?" Claire's heart sank. "Do you know where he is?" The woman shook her head. "No one does." Claire turned toward the elevator, her reflection multiplying across the mirrored walls as the doors closed. The city around her was waking up, but all she could hear was his voice in memory, low and trembling. "I don't know how to live without your noise." And now, as the elevator began to rise, all she could think was that she might already be too late. Boston was still waking when Claire Bennett reached the penthouse. The streets shimmered under pale dawn light, steam rising from manholes, the smell of rain and asphalt heavy in the air. She had driven all night, chasing regret through highways and memories, her heart pounding in rhythm with the city she once tried to escape. Now, standing at the glass doors of Cross Dominion Tower, she hesitated. The last time she'd been here, she had walked away from everything, from pride, from love, from the man who had broken her heart and his own in the same breath. The security guard recognized her, startled. "Mrs. Cross." She blinked at the title, the weight of it still lingering like a scar. "Please," she said softly. "Just Claire." He nodded, stepping aside. "He's upstairs. Hasn't left for days." Her pulse raced. She took the elevator up, watching the numbers climb, her reflection trembling in the mirrored walls. Every floor that passed felt like another layer of fear peeling away. When the doors opened, she stepped into silence. The penthouse was dim, curtains drawn, air thick with the scent of stale coffee and exhaustion. Papers were scattered across the floor, not contracts, but donation forms, blueprints, letters to charities and restoration projects. And at the desk by the window, Nathaniel Cross sat slumped forward, his head resting on his folded arms, asleep in the faint glow of the city beyond. He looked human. The man who once commanded boardrooms now looked like someone who had spent his nights wrestling with ghosts. His tie was gone, his shirt wrinkled, his face pale from sleeplessness. On the desk beside him lay a stack of letters addressed but unsent, each one beginning with the same name, Claire. She approached quietly, afraid that speaking might shatter whatever fragile thing she'd come back for. "Nathan," she whispered. He stirred but didn't wake. A strand of hair fell across his forehead. She reached out without thinking, brushing it back gently, the smallest, most dangerous kind of touch. His eyes opened slowly. For a second, he looked lost between dream and waking. Then, when he saw her, he froze. Claire. Her name left his lips like a prayer he'd stopped believing would ever be answered. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said, voice hoarse from disuse. "I almost didn't come." He straightened, blinking as if afraid she might vanish. "Why are you here?" She hesitated. "Because Evelyn told me the truth." Nathan's breath caught. The recording. She confessed. "It was fake. You never said those words." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of disbelief breaking into something softer, relief and sorrow tangled together. "God." Claire's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried," he said quietly. "But I thought you wouldn't believe me. And maybe I didn't deserve to be believed." She looked around the room, At the donation papers, the dismantled contracts. What is all this? Everything I should have done years ago, he said. I'm dismantling the empire, turning the properties into schools, clinics, community projects, the kind of things you would have built. Her eyes softened. You did this because of me. He shook his head. No, because of who I became when you left. She stepped closer, voice low, almost trembling. You could have called. You could have fought for me. His eyes lifted to hers raw, unguarded, because I thought I didn't deserve you. The room went utterly still. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Claire whispered, You're right. Nathan's face fell until she added, You didn't. But people can change. He stood slowly, each step toward her, careful, reverent. I don't expect forgiveness. Then it's a good thing I didn't come to give it, she said softly. I came to understand. He stopped just inches from her, and she looked up at him, eyes glassy. I understand what it means to love someone who's learning how to be good. His breath caught. Claire? When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. His fingers were cold, trembling. He looked at her as if afraid she might disappear again. I don't want to own anything anymore, he said quietly. Not people, not power, not you. What do you want? Then he took a shaky breath. To choose, to wake up every morning and choose the right thing, not because it profits me, but because it matters. Her eyes filled with tears. No more contracts. He smiled faintly through the ache. No more contracts, only choices. The space between them finally broke. Claire stepped forward, closing the distance. His arms came around her, tentative at first, then certain, as if he'd been holding his breath for weeks just to exhale here, in this moment. She pressed her face against his shoulder. He smelled of coffee and exhaustion, and something achingly human. For a while, they said nothing, only breathing in sync, the kind of silence that doesn't demand words because forgiveness has already begun to take shape without them. Tears fell freely, hers first, then his. They weren't tears of despair this time, but release. When she finally pulled back, she placed her hand on his cheek. You can't undo the past, Nathan, but you can build something better out of what's left. He nodded, eyes glistening. If you'll build it with me. She smiled, small, fragile, real, one choice at a time. He kissed her forehead, not with hunger, but reverence. The kiss of a man who had finally learned what love costs and why it's worth every piece of himself. The sun broke through the clouds then, light spilling through the glass walls, washing over them both. The city outside seemed quieter, slower, almost kind. For the first time in years, Nathan didn't feel like a man trapped in his own reflection. He felt alive. 6 months later, spring had returned to Boston, the kind that didn't just change the weather, but softened the air, coaxing life back into everything that had forgotten how to bloom. The skyline still glittered, but something beneath it had shifted. The city was learning to breathe again. So was Nathaniel Cross. The man who once measured success in stock prices now measured it in stories and families moving into the buildings he'd once hoarded, in playgrounds rising where cold parking lots had stood, in laughter echoing through spaces that used to feel like marble tombs. The Claire Bennett Foundation for Urban Renewal had become a quiet revolution. Every week, Nathan and Claire Bennett worked side by side, not as CEO and consultant, not as husband and wife on paper, but as partners rebuilding something more human than empire. She sketched in bright, airy studios full of sunlight and blueprints. He sat beside her, sleeves rolled up, helping draft proposals and budgets for projects that didn't make money, they made meaning. Claire designed community centers, rooftop gardens, public libraries, places filled with windows and laughter. Nathan sold his penthouse, his fleet of cars, even his yacht, each sale funding a new space for people who had never had one before. One afternoon, as they toured a nearly completed youth center in South Boston, Claire stopped to look at a mural painted by local kids, bright splashes of color, names, and handprints. Nathan stood beside her, quietly watching. "You did this," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did this." He smiled, sunlight glinting in his eyes. "That's new for me, the word we." She glanced at him. "You wear it well." Their days settled into a rhythm that neither of them had expected. Mornings began with coffee and paper-strewn kitchen counters. Her sketches spread beside his laptop. A strange marriage of ink and numbers. He'd pour her tea. She'd steal his toast. Afternoons were full of meetings and site visits, always ending with laughter that felt earned, not performed. Evenings were theirs. Sometimes they cooked. She taught him how to make pasta that didn't taste like efficiency. He taught her how to find joy in burnt toast. Other nights, they walked through the city they had once stood above, now side by side in the streets, their reflections mingling in shop windows instead of glass towers. They rarely spoke of the past. It lingered between them like the scent of rain there, but no longer heavy. Nathan had learned to listen. Really listen when Claire spoke about design, about balance, about light. And Claire had learned that sometimes redemption doesn't come with a grand gesture, but with the quiet repetition of good choices made daily. He no longer signed deals without asking, "Who does this help?" She no longer doubted the sincerity in his eyes when he said, "I'm proud of you." And together, they began to understand that love wasn't a promise made under sterile city hall lights. It was an act renewed in the small hours of ordinary life. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, they sat on a park bench overlooking one of their newest projects, a community garden that used to be a vacant lot. Children's laughter drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of basil and wet soil. Claire leaned against his shoulder, watching the light fade into gold. "You ever think about what we were before all this?" she asked quietly. "All the time," Nathan admitted. "And every time I do, I realize we were both trying to build something, I just built the wrong thing." She smiled faintly. "You learned?" He glanced down at her. "And you stayed long enough to see it." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "No, Nathan, you gave me a reason to come back." They sat in silence for a while, the city's heartbeat pulsing quietly around them. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. "Do you remember this?" She unfolded it, one of her early sketches, the design she'd made for her father's unfinished project. He nodded. "I kept it. Every time I thought about giving up, I looked at it and remembered what you said. That design isn't about profit. It's about purpose." Claire's eyes shimmered with tears she didn't try to hide. "I think we both finally understand that." Nathan's hand found hers. "We're building something that lasts." She smiled. "And it's not made of glass." The streetlights flickered on. In the reflection of a nearby window, they looked older, steadier, changed two people, rebuilt not by power, but by love that chose to stay humble. Nathan broke the silence. "You know, the board still wants us to host an anniversary gala." She groaned. "Not a gala." He chuckled. "They say it'll attract investors." "We don't need investors," she said, squeezing his hand. "We need believers." He smiled. "That's why you're the visionary. And you," she said, resting her head against him, "are finally the man I thought you could be." Later that night, they walked home together, past the glowing windows of shops and cafes. The city felt different now, not a kingdom, not a battlefield, but a home. When they reached the apartment, smaller, humbler, but full of light, Nathan paused at the door. "Claire," he said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me." She turned, smiling softly. "You gave me something worth holding on to." Inside, they cooked dinner, burned garlic, too much salt, laughter echoing through the walls, and somewhere between the smell of tomatoes and the warmth of shared silence, Nathan realized he no longer feared imperfection, because in the cracks of everything they had broken, they had built something stronger, not an empire, but a life. The conference room at Cross Dominion Holdings had never been louder. It was mid-morning, and the skyline glowed behind the wall of glass. But inside, the air was sharp with anger and disbelief. For the first time in its history, the board of directors wasn't nodding along to Nathaniel Cross. They were challenging him. You're dismantling decades of investment selling assets below market value, turning prime real estate into what did you call them? Community centers. Their words hit like stones, clattering across the polished table. Nathan sat at the head, calm, composed, letting the noise pass over him. He no longer flinched from confrontation. He had learned there were worse things than being hated, like being right too late. When the shouting dulled into mutters, he stood. The movement alone silenced the room. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "you're right. I am dismantling the empire." A ripple of protest rose again, but he lifted a hand not commanding, just steady, and for the first time, I'm proud of it. He stepped away from the table, pacing slowly toward the window. The city sprawled below, sunlight glinting off the rooftops. "For years," he began, his voice quiet but certain, "I built towers that cast shadows. I convinced myself they represented progress. But shadows are just proof that you've blocked the light." The room fell still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. He turned back to them. "I made money from fear, from scarcity, from people's need for homes, for safety, the very things I took away from them in the name of profit. And I called it vision." He paused, eyes sweeping across the faces of men and women who had once worshipped his ambition. "But a city isn't built on steel and contracts. It's built on people, and people deserve light. You call what I'm doing charity," he continued. "I call it correction. I'm done profiting from empty towers while families sleep in their cars 2 blocks away. Cross Dominion will stand for something else now, something better." An older investor slammed a folder shut. "You're destroying everything you built." Nathan nodded. "Yes, because it was built wrong." The board exchanged glances. Some whispered, some fumed. The chairman finally leaned forward. "This company isn't yours alone. Nathan, you don't get to rewrite the rules without consequence." Nathan smiled faintly. "I've lived with consequence my whole life." At that moment, the door at the far end of the room opened, heads turned, Claire Bennett stepped inside. Her presence cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pinned back, posture steady, but her eyes calm. Claire told everyone in the room that she belonged there. Nathan froze, stunned for half a heartbeat. Then his lips curved in something small and real relief. "Ms. Bennett," the chairman said stiffly, "this meeting is private." "Then consider me a shareholder," Claire replied, "in the city, if not your company." She walked to the front of the room, standing beside Nathan. "I've watched what he's done these past months," she said. "He's not tearing this company apart. He's finally giving it a soul." The words rippled through the boardroom, soft but undeniable. "Cross Dominion has the power to do something extraordinary," she continued. "You could build neighborhoods that last generations, schools that lift entire families out of poverty. That's not charity, it's legacy." Her gaze swept across the faces around the table, sharp but kind. "You all came here to build something that outlives you. Well, this is your chance." Nathan looked at her pride and awe flickering across his face. For all his eloquence, she had just said more in 2 minutes than he'd managed all morning. The chairman cleared his throat. "You're asking us to risk billions on sentiment." "No," Nathan said, voice steady again. "We're asking you to invest in people, for once." A long silence followed. Then came the rustle of papers, whispered debates, shifting chairs. The air was heavy with calculation, the old instinct to protect, to cling to profit. Finally, the chairman exhaled. "We'll vote," hands raised one by one. The count was close, too close. Martha, standing quietly at the back, caught Nathan's eye and nodded. When the final hand went up, a hesitant one from the CFO, who'd once been his fiercest critic, the room fell silent. "The motion passes," the chairman said reluctantly. "By 1 vote, no one cheered, there was no applause, but Nathan smiled small, almost disbelieving. Then he turned to Claire. Looks like we're officially rebuilding the city. She smiled back. You mean we're finally building it right? They shook hands formal, professional, for the benefit of the watching room. But as they turned to leave, their fingers lingered, threading together naturally. And when they walked out hand in hand, sunlight pouring through the tall glass behind them, it wasn't the exit of a mogul and his consultant. It was the rebirth of two people who had learned that power means nothing without purpose, and love means everything when it becomes action. Outside, the lobby buzzed with reporters and staff whispering rumors of revolution. Cameras flashed, but neither of them looked up. Nathan whispered, "Did you plan that entrance?" Claire smiled. "You needed good lighting for your speech about light." He laughed, a sound freer than it had ever been. As the elevator doors closed, the city gleamed beyond the glass. And for once, the towers he'd built didn't cast shadows. They caught the sun instead. The Charles River shimmered under the late afternoon sun, its surface rippling with gold and memory. Boston had changed again, quieter, somehow, less hurried, or maybe it was just that Nathaniel Cross had finally learned how to see it differently. The city no longer felt like a battlefield or a kingdom. It felt like home. 3 years had passed since the morning he and Claire Bennett had walked out of that boardroom hand in hand. Now, they lived in a renovated brownstone by the river, modest compared to the penthouse he once ruled from, but filled with light, laughter, and the smell of fresh paint and bread. The house was their sanctuary. Wood floors creaked in friendly ways, sunlight spilled across handmade rugs, and every window opened to a view of the river's quiet current. There were no marble statues, no glass walls, no art bought for status, just books, sketches, plants, and a life built slowly, honestly. In the back room, by the biggest window, a little girl sat cross-legged on the floor, a paintbrush in hand. Her name was Lila, 6 years old, wide-eyed, fiercely creative. Their daughter, adopted 2 years ago from a foster program Claire had helped fund. She painted every afternoon in that same spot, always by the window, always near the light. Today, her canvas showed the river bending toward the horizon, dotted with tiny boats and birds that looked like hopeful scribbles. Nathan watched her for a moment before stepping into the room. "What's that one called?" he asked. Lila grinned, not looking up. "The place where the sun sleeps." He smiled. "I like that." She glanced up at him. "Did you ever build a place like that?" Daddy Nathan knelt beside her, thoughtful. "No," he said softly, "but I think I live in one now." From the kitchen came Claire's voice, calling over the sound of simmering sauce. "Dinner in 10 minutes, coming," Nathan replied, standing. He paused at the doorway, watching her move around the kitchen barefoot, apron slightly crooked, humming under her breath like she always did when she was at peace. Some days, he still couldn't believe she'd stayed. Other days, he couldn't imagine life before her. After dinner, they took their usual evening walk along the river path. The air was cool, scented with lilacs and the faint salt of the sea. Nathan's hand found hers as they walked. "The university asked if I'll teach another term," he said. Claire smiled. "And will you?" He nodded. "They want me to add a new seminar, Ethics in Business Building with Purpose." She laughed softly. "I like that title. Very you." He raised an eyebrow. "The old me or the new me?" She squeezed his hand. "The one who learned the difference." Claire's work had flourished, too. Her mentorship program for young designers had become one of the most sought-after initiatives in the state. She'd helped dozens of students launch careers built on creativity and conscience, not profit. Every year, she made them promise one thing: design for someone who needs it, not someone who can pay for it. Nathan often guest lectured at her workshops, though he never stopped teasing her about being the better teacher. "You just have better stories." She'd tell him. He'd grin. There are stories now. One late afternoon in early spring, as rain began to fall in soft threads across the river, a letter arrived. It was hand-addressed, the handwriting elegant but trembling slightly. From Evelyn Ross. Claire hesitated before opening it. Nathan watched quietly as she unfolded the page. Dear Claire and Nathan, it's taken me a long time to write this. I spent the last year in treatment for addiction and depression, the kind of pain I used to cover with cruelty. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to do something good now. I started a recovery center for women who've lost everything, some to men like I used to love, some to themselves. We call it the Lighthouse. Maybe redemption isn't a place we reach, but something we keep building, one brick at a time. You taught me that, even if you never meant to. If you're ever in New York, come visit. There's a garden on the roof. The view is better than any penthouse. Evelyn Claire folded the letter gently. She found her way back. Nathan nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. He looked out the window, the rain catching the last of the sunset. Maybe that's what we've all been doing, learning how to start again. That evening, the three of them sat by the river Lila, between them, coloring the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Nathan wrapped an arm around Claire, drawing her close. She rested her head against his shoulder, her free hand brushing a strand of hair from his face. The water glimmered, the city lights flickering like promises across its surface. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Nathan said softly, "Do you ever think about how it all began?" Claire smiled. "With a letter." He laughed quietly. "A rejection letter. And now, look where it brought us." She reached for his hand again. "Some stories don't end with perfection." "Nathan." He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "They end with peace." And then, like a voice carried on wind and memory, a soft, final narration. "Some stories don't end with perfection. They end with peace, the kind that comes when two people choose love over pride again and again. In a world that often glorifies success, this story reminds us that the greatest victories are not measured in wealth, but in change." Nathaniel Cross spent years building towers that reached the sky, yet only when those towers came crashing down did he learn how to build something real: trust, humility, and love. Through Claire Bennett, we see that strength is not loud. It is quiet, steady, and kind. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it transforms what's left of it into something new. Even the most damaged hearts can begin again, not by erasing their mistakes, but by learning from them. For many of us, there comes a time when we realize it's not too late to rebuild, to make amends, to choose people over pride, purpose over power, because peace is not given, it is built, one honest act at a time. So, if you've ever wondered whether redemption is possible, it is. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to say, "I was wrong, but I can be better." That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength that lasts long after the applause fades. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey through the billionaire who married to destroy, but found redemption in love. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that forgiveness, compassion, and second chances still matter, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all that it's never too late to begin again. Stay tuned for more heartfelt tales, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that help us rediscover ourselves.